All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome Cawthra Park staff and students and our guests from across the Peel Board. My name is Stacey Tiller and I'm the Artistic Director of the Regional Arts Program, and it is my distinct pleasure to host this special event this morning. Before we begin, it is important to acknowledge the land on which we are today. As many of us are settlers on this land, it is our collective responsibility to pay respect and recognize that this land is the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the New Credit First Nations, and we are here because this land was occupied. In recognizing that this space occupies colonized First Nations territories and out of respect for the rights of Indigenous people, it is our collective responsibility to recognize our colonial histories and present-day implications, and to honor, protect, and sustain the land. Today's event is an initiative that has evolved from the work we are doing in the arts departments to eradicate anti-Black racism, evolve Eurocentric curriculum, and to provide students with positive role models in the arts industries. In all classrooms, it's imperative that educators foster their own racial literacy to help further their understanding about BIPOC youth experiences. BIPOC youth voices, opinions, and agency must be centered to reimagine the type of school environment they need to thrive. Our school needs opportunities that allow all students to engage in these conversations and access the support needed to reduce conflict and promote restorative practices. As we know, traditional Eurocentric curriculums focus primarily on the white narrative, leaving underrepresented students without positive role models. School plays an important part in shaping futures, as many students find role models to emulate in their developmental years. We have an exciting lineup today of guest artists that we have hired from different arts disciplines to get us through an exciting morning about learning what their arts journey has been, and to get to know them a little bit better as we go through this morning. And we'll have some discussion questions for them after they present. We'll have breakout rooms later. So we'll walk you through how that whole morning is going to play out. So first of all, let me introduce you. First, I'll just sort of discuss all four of our guest artists, and then we'll go through one at a time, and each of them are going to share their experiences with you. So these guest artists are not only positive role models for those that share the same heritage as them, but we hope to engage all students here today with the successes and the struggles of these artists through their career and their successes in an effort to dismantle prejudice and stereotype in all student thinking. We want to expand our initiative in our own school and in our arts departments. And so we are really pleased today to welcome Drew Hayden Taylor, playwright and filmmaker, Quentin Versetti, a visual storyteller, Larnell Lewis, who is a fantastic drummer, and Chantel Goode, who is a dancer and choreographer. So I'm going to start this morning with our first guest artist, Drew Hayden Taylor. Drew is an award-winning playwright, novelist, journalist, and filmmaker. Born and raised on the Curve Lake First Nation in Ontario, Drew has spent the last 3 decades doing everything from performing stand-up comedy at the Kennedy Centre in Washington, D.C., to serving as artistic director for Canada's premier Indigenous theatre company, Native Earth Performing Arts. This coming fall, his 34th book, M.E. Tomorrow, an exploration of Indigenous futurisms, will be released, and currently a documentary series he co-directed, wrote, and hosts, Going Native. It explores the wild, wacky, interesting, and amazing things First Nation people are accomplishing in North America. It airs Saturday nights at 8:30 on APTN. So without further ado, this is the part that gets a little interesting as I learn to navigate here. Just going to select our guest artist here. Okay. So let me please introduce to you Mr. Drew Hayden Taylor. If he wants to unmute, then we will get started.
Aneen to all the young students out there. As you heard, my name is Drew Hayden Taylor, and I'm one of those rare breeds of animals you'll come across occasionally called a professional writer. That is to say, I do not have a day job. I do not spend my afternoons saying, would you like fries with that? But more than anything, I think of myself as a contemporary storyteller, because this is the 21st century, and in the 21st century, there are so many different ways to tell stories. It used to be storytelling was primarily oral, and then it became literary, and then there was theater, and then there was radio, then there was television, and there were movies, etc., etc., etc. So that in today's world, even video games have intricate and detailed narratives in them. So practically everything in today's world involves storytelling. I was born and raised on the Curve Lake First Nation, just north of Peterborough, Ontario, and I'd always been interested in being a writer, because one of the great things about being a writer is you get to create a universe. And as a young kid living on a First Nations community, I discovered that I had more control over the universes I created than the universes I lived in, and I kind of liked that. But it became sort of apparent to me that I didn't know that much about writing or the life of a writer, and I decided to seek out and find out more about the profession of being a writer. So I went to those who were more worldly and smarter than me. And I remember the first person I went to was my grade 11 English teacher. And I went to my grade 11 English teacher and I said, sir, and I remember walking into the room, he was sitting there looking for something in the bottom left-hand drawer of his desk. I walked up to him and I said, sir, is it possible to make a living from creative writing? And without even looking up from his desk, he said, no, not really. So that was my first impression of the world of being a writer. My grade 11 English teacher telling me not to bother being a writer. It won't get me anywhere. And since then, several decades, I have become a writer. I've got 33 published books. And one of the things I get to do as a professional writer is I get to go, pre-COVID times, I would go to a lot of schools, talk with a lot of young people about the profession of being a writer. And I would always tell young people, the only thing I can teach you, the one thing you need to remember when you walk out that door, the only nugget of information you need to take that I can share with you is never trust your grade 11 English teacher. And I've lived by that for many decades. But other than that, one of the things I have discovered about being a writer is there's a lot of unexpected benefits and a lot of unexpected pain. The benefits being it can take you around the world. Some of the pains of it are you get to physically see your own strengths and limitations. And the reason I work in so many different fields, I'm a playwright. I've written documentaries and directed documentaries, novels, short stories. I did a graphic novel, is primarily because to me, there's no one way of telling a story. I come from an oral background. On my reserve growing up, I have many wonderful memories of sitting around a campfire across the road at my grandparents, listening to people tell interesting and fun stories, or hearing these same stories across a kitchen table. When I was growing up, we had 2 television stations, and there's a term, if you don't understand this term, ask your teacher. Both stations were very snowy, because I predate satellite television and I predate internet access. So there's not much to do, so I would sit around, we would tell funny stories. And that, for my people, for Indigenous people, that was a method of transmitting history, culture, philosophy, morality, etc. Stories were the method of translation for all important things in our culture. And the more stories I heard, the more I wanted to tell stories. And I have many fond memories of sitting home with these books on my lap, because as I said, we didn't have a lot of television, so I would read extensively, and I would read these exotic stories from all over the world that suddenly would come and land on my lap, and I would read about far off places that I never thought I would visit, and yet here I was reading about all these countries around the world and all these people around the world, and I used to think, wouldn't it be cool if someday I could write stories about my life growing up on a reserve and send them out to the world for other people to read and have that same sense of astonishment and interest that happens. And never really expecting it would happen, and it did. But part of the fun of what I do is the kind of stories I have chosen to write. I wrote a native vampire novel. People ask me why did I do that? Well, because nobody else I knew was writing a native vampire novel. I wrote a collection of Indigenous science fiction short stories. Why? Why not? Because I wanted to do it. At that time, nobody else I knew was doing it, and I just love science fiction, and I wanted to take the environment I was very familiar with and make it interesting, make it special, make it unique. So I started writing science fiction stories. I just finished a new novel that's essentially a native horror novel. And again, when I was selling it, people would say, you know, I didn't realize native people wrote horror novels, and I said we write practically anything and everything. That's the interesting thing about storytelling. Storytelling changes with the times. I know a lot of native people now who are writing murder mysteries. Another friend of mine wrote a book that is essentially an Indigenous version of Lord of the Rings. It's a trilogy of books about dwarves and elves and swords and magic. It's really interesting, really fabulous, and very, very Indigenous. But the great thing about true storytelling and true writing is, because I say it's very Indigenous, that means absolutely nothing. Good storytelling, everybody can enjoy, everybody can understand it, everybody can embrace it and see themselves in those stories. The background may be unique, but the characters and the situation are something I think we all can relate to and embrace. So that is who I am. That is what I do. I spend my life making things up for a living. And it beats working for a living. It beats working in a cubicle. And I don't know of many other careers where you get paid to lie. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Okay, I am going to switch gears here. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Drew. I'm now going to introduce you to our next presenter. His name is Quentin Versetti. Quentin Versetti is a multi-award-winning, multidisciplinary visual griot, artpreneur, educator, and artivist. There's about 4 new words that I learned in that sentence, so I'm very excited to learn a little bit more about it. With a bachelor's in fine arts from OCAD University and a master's in art education from Concordia University, he is one of the world's leading Afrofuturist artographers. His scholarly work looks at Afrofuturism as a teaching tool and is the winner of the 2020 Joshua Glover Memorial Competition. He's Toronto's first monument of a person of African descent and the recipient of the Governor General's Bronze Medal. Vercetty's creative works address social issues and the imaginative futures of representation and preservation of the memories of people of African descent. Vercetty started the BSAM Canada Institute chapter in 2016 to help combat anti-Black systemic erasure and improve the art industry for artists of African descent in the creative industry of Canada. Throughout his work, he hopes to engage minds and inspire hearts to help make the world a better place, not only for today, but for many tomorrows to come. So I would like to now introduce you to Quentin Versetti. I'm going to just switch live here. Okay, great. Please welcome Mr. Quentin Versetti.
All right. So greetings, bonjour, and wagwan, everyone. I am uber honored and excited to share with you about my work and a little bit about myself and how I went through using art to reclaim my brilliance. So who am I? I'm an Afrofuturist griot, an artographer, artist, researcher, teacher, practitioner. And artographer means that I combine all of these elements in one. And so what we're looking at is my 10-year journey of kind of reclaiming my creative voice and then where I'm at now. And so with that said, I am a visual imagineer, meaning I engineer and imagine things and put them together. And on my resume, if I ever created one, I will use the term conceptual engineer. So I'm just giving you little tokens. So I don't just claim to myself as an artist, and I also claim to be an interstellar tree, meaning that I believe that I grow no matter what, no matter where, no matter when. And so my journey is about reclaiming my childhood, reclaiming my imaginative, fun self, you know. And so I started off painting, and I really started off painting to be able to express myself creatively and to make sense of the world around me. Essentially, I grew up in a neighborhood that was pretty rough in Rexdale, and then moved to Malton, Mississauga at a young age. And I just found myself just really getting into a lot of mix up and trouble. And essentially, I kind of lost that fun. I lost that adventure that I had within myself. And so reclaiming my artistic voice and reclaiming my creative abilities was an aspect of reclaiming my childhood and reclaiming the imaginative aspect that I felt like circumstances took away from me, especially around being a Black male. Um, Throughout my life as a teenager and growing up, people were telling me what they thought I should be. You know, teachers told me that I should maybe pick up a trade. Actually, when I was in university at OCAD University, I was told that if I continued to paint Black people, that I wouldn't amount to anything. And so a lot of my work is encouraging myself to see beyond the limitations that people are trying to place on me, but then also encourage other people to see beyond their limitations of their imagination. And so a part of doing so is exploring this realm of Afrofuturism, which is about allowing people to see Black people in the future, you know, and see a future for Black folks. And so in order for me to do that, I had to first start to see myself differently. And so I got into digital artwork, art making, specifically storytelling. And I got into digital works where I was making art pieces in futuristic landscapes. And so in 2010, I won the Governor General Award, which really gave me the propeller that I needed. It came at a very important time in my life where I actually failed a lot of my art classes, and I failed actually almost all my courses because I wasn't attending school. Because the teachers were telling me I wouldn't amount to anything, they were telling me I wasn't smart. I started to believe them, and so I dropped out of high school in the grade 10, and essentially I went through life for 5 years, essentially not believing in myself. And then at a certain point, thanks to my friends and thanks to my uncle who taught me how to do graphic design, I started to believe in myself and start to see myself more than what people thought I was. And so I started to apply myself into school, and I got back into high school, and I ended up being on the honor roll and started doing really well for myself. And it was all because I was using art as a way of expanding my imagination. Like, I was really bad at math. I'm probably still bad at math, but when I started drawing out my math problems and drawing out math equations, they started to make sense to me. And so next thing I know, I got the Governor General Award, and I got a huge sum of money to really kickstart my creative career. And so I used that to go to university. And while in university, teachers were putting me down left, right, and center. They were just really trying to limit my imagination. And so I made this art piece to tell my own story of how I was speaking myself into existence and speaking my truth and explaining my truth through my art and how I had a vision. And so this art piece is called Baba Garvey, Feeling Like Ezekiel. And the story behind this one is Baba is the name of my grandfather, my great-grandfather, who really inspired me and learning about my ancestry really made me feel like I have purpose, and that I have to make good on the sacrifices that my ancestors made for me to be where I am today. And then Garvey is a reference to Marcus Messiah Garvey, who was Jamaica's first national hero. I'm of Jamaican descent, and so Marcus Garvey always spoke about having pride of who you are and knowing your roots. And one of the statements that he made is like, if you don't have confidence in life, you are twice defeated. You know, and so I started to have confidence in myself. And in the aspect of feeling like Ezekiel, speaking to a biblical prophet who spoke about seeing a vision of people coming to life when they heard the truth. And so I felt like sharing my truth as an artist would help people to see and come to life in terms of recognizing the humanity. And so I work in a program called Cinema 4D, and it's really about world building. And again, this program has allowed me to expand my imagination. And it made me realize that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I want you all to realize that you are your ancestors' wildest dreams. And then as I start to expand and learn more about Afrofuturism, and I used that term earlier, and I want to quickly define it. So Afrofuturism is a term to represent a Pan-African, meaning incorporating all global African cultures, arts movement. It's a practice and theory that includes art-making approaches and creative ways of thinking about how all living things can heal and continue to exist and evolve through an African-centered point of view. And so for me to expand my imagination, I had to see how we all kind of work together and how we can all heal and how my work can speak to multiple people. And so my interest again in Afrofuturism came out of coming from a place in my neighborhood and in my teenage life and younger of not being able to see beyond the next day and not being able to think about myself in the future, but then also relating to my grandparents and my parents and my ancestors. But then it also relates to a movie called The Fifth Element, which when I saw this movie at 7 years old, I was blown away. So I want to show you a quick clip from this scene where it just had different representations of people of African descent. So this movie was the first time I saw representations of ancient African knowledge being presented in context, meaning that it was presented in Africa with African people, and it was using real ancient knowledge and not made up things. And I was just blown away to see African representation in space, you know, and aliens in Africa and all these different things. So it just blew my mind to see that. In this movie was the first time I saw a Black president. And this president, he wasn't just a regular president, he was a president of the Intergalactic Federation. And then in this movie, it was the first time I saw black. So, you know, they had Stacey McKenzie, who's one of Canada's top models. She was in there. And, you know, just different tones of black stuff. It was also the first time I saw reggae and Rastafari culture represented in the, and then also seeing Black romance on TV screen was also amazing. Also the different accents. So again, seeing this representation really expanded my imagination, which inspired me to continue to want to make different representations for today's generation. And so the main thing in my artwork is this concept of Sankophonology. And Sankophonology comes from a term called Sankofa. And Sankofa means it is not taboo to go and retrieve what you forgot. San meaning without, and then Kofa meaning forgetting. So without forgetting, it's about remembering. And this is an important concept in my work and in all the storytelling that I do, because I want us to remember that we were all one united people. We are all one family, and we need to remember that. And so all the storytelling is about expanding the imagination to think about how we can become reunified as humans. And so a lot of my artwork reflects on this idea of connecting the past, present, and future. And I do that through monuments. So I repurpose monuments, I remix monuments, and then I depict people of African descent. And so this is a monument of Queen Victoria in 2 places, at McGill University and at Columbia. But this actual monument is based on an actual African figurine. And so I reclaimed that iconography, so that image, and I depicted at the time my girlfriend as a queen sitting on her own throne, and she's kind of reclaiming herself as someone of importance. And so I did this with other people's stories, not just people who I knew, but also young people who I worked with. And I wanted to tell their stories and let them know that they themselves are monumental. And so this is an art piece of a young man named Omar. And the main idea is that he's a young person who created an after-school program for other young men and for guys who he felt like would get into trouble if they had nothing to do. And so his special abilities was that he thought with his heart. And so that's why you see that cable going from his head to his heart. And then the second one is of a young lady named Albrighton, and her special abilities is how she writes poetry and rap and produce her own music, and she tries to inspire other young people through the music that she's making. And so again, all my work is about connecting the past, present, and future, and showing this idea of Black people in the future, but also being unified and being in connection with one another. And so I got into making AR. So I went from making digital artwork and digital monuments to then wanting to make virtual and AR augmented reality work. And so this one is a commission that I did with the Goethe Institute, and where I was using multiple references from real life and then remixing it with the future. And so this is me just speaking about my process of working on a tablet. Sometimes I use my hands, sometimes I use my pen. But again, it's just constantly trying to expand my imagination. And so the last thing I want to share with y'all, beyond my book and the work that I've been making, is this monument that I'm working on. So I'm making Toronto's first monument of a person of African descent, and Canada's 16th monument of a person of African descent, but really the first Afrofuturistic monument in Canada. And so meaning I combine sci-fi elements into that art piece to tell a deeper story about this man named Joshua Glover. And so Joshua Glover, he is a person who was a runaway enslaved African who went from America and through the Underground Railroad came to Toronto in the mid 1800s. And so I was chosen to make this monument through a competition. And I embedded all these aspects of Joshua Glover's story that I realized reflected my own story. And it expanded my imagination of what I thought of myself and what's most important to me. And this is what I want to leave you with. Joshua Glover, his story of being a runaway enslaved African is not a unique story. What is unique about his story is how people spoke and documented his character. And because people spoke about him being an upright person, being a person who cared about community, a person who was always giving and always caring, they documented who he was. And that was unheard of because a lot of times people just wrote down the names of people but never wrote about their character of who they were, especially during that time period where slavery was still happening and enslavement of people was still happening. And so Joshua Glover, people recognizing him as someone who was an outstanding human being allowed them to expand their imagination of how they saw other Black people. And so I'm very honored to be able to make this art piece of Joshua Glover to expand people's imagination of how they see your character as a person of African descent or a person of BIPOC background. And I hope that, you know, by the end of this session today, that you think about how you can expand your own imagination or other people's imagination. And the last thing I want to share with you before we go is this art piece that I made. This art piece is going to be a commission art piece for Fortnite, the video game. So I'm making my first video game character, which I am uber excited about. And I'll be excited to talk to you more about that later.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Quentin. There were so many incredible visuals there that really give us perspective on the things that you're talking about. Thank you so much. I'm going to go now and introduce our next artist. Okay. This is Larnell Lewis. He is a Grammy award-winning musician, composer, producer, and educator. He is from Brampton and a graduate of the Mayfield Rap program. Based in Toronto, he has established himself among the most diverse and in-demand drummers in the world. His latest album, In the Moment, is a mix of contemporary funk and jazz, featuring an incredible band and his own original compositions. He was brought up in the church with a background in gospel music, but stays true to his Caribbean roots as his parents are from St. Kitts and Nevis. His work with the fusion superband Snarky Puppy put him on the map, and he has worked all over the world. Drums are in his heritage and deeply in his family. His brother Ricardo, is the drummer for The Weeknd. He also stays connected to the local scene by doing some teaching work at Humber College Jazz Program. An inspiring speaker and cross-genre specialist, Larnell has unique perspective on the music industry as a whole, the lineage of Caribbean influences in contemporary genres, as well as the changing role of artists in the current climate. So I will now introduce you visually to Mr. Larnell Lewis. Standing by, going live, Mr. Larnell, take it away.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. Great to see the other guests as well and hear their stories. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm just going to play one of my songs for you. This song is called Change Your Mind. And it speaks to, you know, that idea of understanding if you looking for an out, looking for an exit, if you change your mindset, you can actually change your options and change your outcome. This is from In the Moment and also from my latest album, Relive the Moment. And I'm going to play that for you right now. So I hope you enjoy.
Woo! That was incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If I could just share a little bit and switch my cameras.
Just while he's doing that, you should all know that during that, somehow, while he was playing live, he was also able to text me and say, hey, is the sound okay? So, I mean, my mind is blown. Totally incredible.
Thank you. So, I'm here to share about my journey. For me, it starts actually before I was born, as much as I know. And as far back as I've heard, music actually starts with my great-grandfather in Santo Domingo, in the Dominican Republic. Sorry, that was a bit of an intense performance, so I need a breath.
That's okay. Take your time. I can, I can tell knock-knock jokes or just take a breath.
Yeah, everybody breathe with me.
That's
1, 2, 3, in and out. There we go. So Santo Domingo, great-grandfather, guitar player, grandfather in St. Kitts, multi-instrumentalist. My uncles on my dad's side, all musicians, and come right up to the current day, which would be myself, being a professional drummer. My brother is also the drummer for the weekend, and my sister plays a little bit of drums and sings. Grew up in church, but the beginning for me, as far as drumming, was at age 2. And I'd like to talk about that, even though I've gone through so many things, because people say, well, music has been there for you. You know, you've had it since before you were born. That's not fair. And I'll say, pause, hold on. I had to work. I had to understand. I had to research. I had to desire, you know, and understand that this thing that's inside of me, this little thing that's poking up, how do I nurture it? My community. And so my church family out in Malton, found ways to challenge me and really help me to grow. And from there, I went on to Mayfield Secondary School, another rap program. And I was able to actually find a lot of the influences that really helped to take me to the next level. I am now a professor at Humber College, and I also went through the program at Humber. And again, I'd like to mention all of that because it's a part of my journey in terms of learning my instrument, in terms of getting a better understanding of community, but also just a reminder that we got to put the time in, we got to put the work in, we got to understand where we come from and what we're about. And so just to wrap up my time, I'll just share a little bit of a story. As a lot of people are coming to know a little more now, and others have known for a long time, that Black American music, also known as jazz, started in America and was represented by Black people. And for me, coming up, I didn't like jazz, but I don't think I understood it enough at the time. In my house, we played anything from Garth Brooks to Oscar Peterson to Fred Hammond to Ella Fitzgerald's Christmas album, which I think I probably know note for note from right now. Quincy Jones, Stevie Wonder, there might have been some George Strait in there, Christmas time as well. You know, Caribbean people love their country music. And, you know, I didn't understand that this music I heard was jazz. I just took it as music. I took it as a genre. I took it as a feel, and I just kind of embedded it inside of me and just went about my way. And when I started to acknowledge what jazz was and its history, then I started to find a little bit of inconsistency. You know, it was really hard for me to dig in deep because it just felt like this music of the past, this music of back then, this music that did not have any kind of connection to now, except the fact that we use it harmonically speaking. And even that might have been a challenge, depending on if you're into, like, you know, what's the argument? Is it like flat 10 or sharp 9? So for the music people, you'll know what that's about. But for me, really digging in deep and a lot deeper, the connection to jazz for me came from the Caribbean. Knowing that in New Orleans, the cradle, where music, specifically jazz, started, and from jazz, you got gospel, you got rock, you got funk, you got a ton of stuff that comes from that. It took me to understand the history of New Orleans, to actually figure out that I had a personal master key with Caribbean music. The way that the music flexes, the way that you're able to, express yourself, the way some of the rhythms shift and move are identical to some of the things you'd experience from the Caribbean. And so this experience for me of this journey of learning about how not only I came to be with the music from my land, St. Kitts and Nevis specifically, but also how jazz being an improvised music and an opportunity for you or for me to express myself was a huge roadblock to overcome. And so I'll just leave you with the message that we really, me and you, we all need to take a step back and just look at where we've come from, find out why we're unique. What is it about us that's special? And connect it to the things going forward. Again, I'll say jazz music wasn't represented as much in my life by Black people. And it was a challenge to find that connection until I did. And going forward now, I just feel so much more open. I feel so much more at ease about expressing myself and believing in it. There was a time where I didn't think I was jazz enough. I mean, what does that even mean, right? So understanding yourself, learning how to express yourself, and a through line that I'm seeing through this hang so far is just knowing your history and understanding what you desire for yourself and believing yourself and just pushing yourself to continue to reinvent. And that's my time.
Thank you so much, Larnell. That's fantastic. I'm going to introduce now our next speaker. Just one moment here. Okay, next up in our incredible lineup and our final and fourth speaker is Chantel Goode. She's originally from Toronto, Canada, is a freelance dancer, choreographer, and teaching artist. She studied at Marymount Manhattan College, where she received a Bachelor of Fine Arts with a concentration in choreography. Chantelle has taught for programs across North America, including Fresh Dance Intensive, Ignite, The Bridge, the Protege Movement, Activate, an artist series, Cawthra Park Secondary School, Painted Dance Collective, On the Floor, Intrepid Dance Company, and Kinetics Dance Group. She is the programs director of Share the Movement, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing diversity in the professional dance community by working alongside young BIPOC dancers. Chantel continues to deepen her learning around decolonizing practices in order to foster inclusive environments for her students and cultivate community whenever possible. Quote, teaching allows me to put my learning experience into practice and acts as a constant reminder that I'm always a student. My goal as an educator is to cultivate safe spaces where dancers are free to discover their unique voices and explore all facets of their artistry, end quote. So it is my pleasure now to introduce you in a visual way to Chantel Goode.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am super honored to be here today alongside these incredible guest artists. So yeah, that Stacey gave you a little bit of my teaching bio, but I would love to just share a little bit more about my journey. So my name is Chantel Goode. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently located on the traditional lands of the Munsee, Lenape, and Canarsie tribes, otherwise known as Brooklyn, New York. Yeah, so I began dancing at a very young age, but I didn't really start to take it seriously until high school, I would say. I attended Earl Haig Secondary School, which some of you probably know, it's in North York. So I studied dance there, and at the same time, I was also training at a competitive dance studio in Markham, Ontario. And I think there is where I really found that dance could be your career. And there are a lot of kind of different avenues one can take if you want to be a dancer. So following high school, I decided to move to New York because I felt as though there was just more opportunity and I really wanted to kind of explore other places. So I attended Marymount Manhattan College, which is a liberal arts school. on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, if you're familiar. So I received my BFA in dance with a concentration in choreography, meaning that I took many composition courses and improvisation courses in school. I also had the opportunity to choreograph a lot, and that's kind of where I found my love for making. Yeah, making dances, it came kind of naturally to me, and I really found that my dance experience really informed my choreography and still does to this day. So since then, I have been working as a freelance artist in New York. I'm on an O1 visa, which allows me to kind of work in New York and also Toronto if I want to come back. And I really love working as a freelancer because I'm able to do a lot of different types of jobs and meet a lot of different types of people. Freelancing, if you don't know the term, in other words, I'm not in a full-time company or a full-time job. I really have the freedom to kind of explore a lot of different avenues. So I would love to just share a little bit of my work, just so you can get a little bit more of a feel for who I am. Okay, technology. Hopefully we can see this okay. And I'm just going to speak over this. So I have worked in both kind of concert and commercial dance realms. Commercial dance meaning TV and film. So I've been lucky to dance for artists including Jennifer Lopez and Snoop Dogg. I recently danced for her at the MTV Africa Awards, which was incredible. I have also worked with Indigenous artist Iskway. We worked in Toronto together, which is this clip here. And then I've also done a lot of concert dance as well. Concert dance meaning live theater, live performance. So a lot of you probably have stages in your schools, and that would be considered kind of concert work. So I've danced in companies, including Still Motion Dance Company. This was a performance that premiered at the Joyce Theater in New York. So yeah, I've kind of been everywhere and done a lot of different styles, as you can see as well. I really value, just creating a versatile career for myself. And then these are a couple clips of my own choreographic work. I've worked with younger dancers. I've worked with professionals. This was part of a piece I did at Cawthra Park. Shout out to those students. So yeah, my choreography also just continues to allows me to explore different facets of my artistry. And I just love being inspired by my students. So just a little taste. I'm gonna stop sharing this now. Okay. Great, amazing. So yeah, I work as a dancer, a choreographer, and also a teaching artist. Teaching, I think, comes naturally to me as my mom is the principal of a school and my dad is a teacher as well. So I kind of grew up in education, and I think, it has always just been a passion of mine. And I, like Stacy mentioned in my quote, I consider myself to be a student always, even though I am a professional. I'm always a student. I'm always learning and growing. And I think especially now with my teaching practices, especially, I'm learning how to decolonize my work, meaning kind of challenge the Eurocentric practices that have influenced the way we live. So, some of the ways I do that is valuing process over product. We are human beings in process, I like to say. Practicing radical transparency and really just encouraging everyone to bring their whole authentic selves into the space, just so I can really try to foster really inclusive environments for my students. Fast forward to now, this past year with the pandemic, which we have all experienced collectively, I lost majority of my work. So I really found myself looking for other ways to feed my passions outside of movement. And those being, arts advocacy I really care about, as well as anti-Black racism work. My mom works in an equity board for the Durham District School Board. So again, I'm constantly having conversations around anti-racism work. And I found that it's a really interesting journey that I'm on, trying to infuse that work with my artistic practices. I think with this recent global reckoning around racial justice, I found myself asking, how can I contribute? How can I, serve others, not only just myself as an artist? Because I think in this profession, it's very easy to, be focused on our goals and be really, into ourselves. But now I think I'm really allowing myself to do more for the people around me. So last summer, I developed a nonprofit organization called Share the Movement. And and it's been really fulfilling work. Our mission is really to increase diversity in the professional dance community because it is definitely lacking. So we do that by providing support to young BIPOC artists, you know, giving them scholarships, covering their tuition for school, you know, any ways that we can just offer that support, mentorships, again, just so they can really see themselves represented as professionals, similar to what we're doing today. Hopefully you young artists out there are being inspired. I'm being inspired today just by what we're doing here. So yeah, I think it's really important to really nurture the younger generation and ensure that while they're growing up, they feel valued and seen. You know, when I was growing up, since I was probably 7 years old at my dance studios, I was never allowed to wear my hair naturally, for example. You know, I have curls because I'm half Black and, you know, I'm Jamaican. But I was always told my hair was a distraction, and that, you know, I think at the time I didn't realize how harmful that was to myself and how I owned my identity. I never had, you know, my skin color tights or dance wear. You know, I always had to wear the pink tights to fit in. And, you know, even to this day, yes, I'm a professional, but I walk into audition rooms and jobs and I'm the only Black woman or the only woman of color. This is still happening, you know? So I think the older I get, the more understanding and awareness I have of the world around me. So I do realize kind of those hardships and those microaggressions and things that I'm sure all of us have experienced in terms of the artists who are here today. And yeah, I think now I'm in the process of really reclaiming my identity and owning my Blackness and allowing that to really inform the decisions I make in terms of my career. You know, one of the projects I have upcoming this summer, I'm working on an immersive dance theater show. Immersive work is basically when the audience has the freedom to be a part of the work. They're pretty much embedded in the work. They can choose their own adventure and maybe follow different characters. Yeah, so I'm working on this production, and it's about a true story that happened in 1969 during the height of the Civil Rights era. And it talks about this Afro-American society, so a group of Black college students who held a sit-in and occupied the administration, so that basically to demand that they implement more equitable practices and allow them to take certain classes and offer them housing. So stories like that, I think, are really exciting to me. You know, the type of work that I want to do is work that really offers new perspectives or shares stories that maybe people hadn't heard before. You know, one of my all-time inspirations ever, she's a musician, Nina Simone, and she says our responsibility as artists is to reflect the times. And I just love that quote so much, and I think I live by it, honestly, as an artist. I think we're so lucky to work in a medium that allows us to process and reflect and share. You know, I think to all of you young students out there, I would only encourage you to continue developing your voice and committing to your work and showing up with your whole selves, whatever your identity is. You know, claim that and own that. And don't be afraid to share your voice. If you have an idea or a story, whatever it is you want to share, I would only encourage you to go for it. Another saying that I love is jumping off on nothing and landing on something. You know, even if you have a snippet of an idea, you know, you kind of have to jump off the cliff to try, and you're always going to land on something, and you're going to learn from that experience. So yeah, if I could leave you with one thing, it's just that. Own your voice, claim it, and just share your art with the world, because it really is important and necessary, and it matters. So thank you all so much for listening to my little spiel. I'm so looking forward to talking to all of you in the breakout rooms later. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Chantel. That was amazing. Really appreciate that. Okay, we are going to now, I'm just going to switch gears here. Okay, so we are going to now have a panel discussion, essentially. I've polled the teachers at school, and we asked them, you know, what kind of questions do you think your students would like to know? What kind of, you know, questions do you have for these guest artists in terms of their work as artists, their work as BIPOC artists, and especially in these particularly challenging times. And so we have boiled it down. There were a lot of fantastic questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the first one. And if I could just ask the guest artist, it's really an open conversation between all of you. And I won't be able to have all of your pictures and up at the same time, but certainly if you want to just kind of go, yep, pick me, I'll start off, then just jump in whenever you feel that you can. You can all be unmuted, but it just take me a second to pop your video up on the screen. Okay, so the first question that I'd like to pose to the panel is, when faced with adversity in your art discipline, what did you do to overcome those challenges? Who or what did you turn to for support? So I'll pop that out to you, and if anybody wants to start with that, that would be great. Okay, Larnell, thank you. If you want to unmute, I'll just send you a picture here.
All right. For me, as I mentioned before, the community has been a really big support for me. And so, you know, whether it was my church community or anyone in the industry, I would basically let them know what was going on. You know, I over time gathered mentors in the industry. And what it looked like for me was, if I was having challenges with understanding how to navigate the industry, or if I felt that, you know, I wasn't able to say my piece in certain situations. I'm a multi-instrumentalist as well. So you can imagine all the drummer jokes that show up, and people are like, you don't know where C major is on a keyboard. But I would lean on a lot of people because, you know, in a sense, we do experience some of the same challenges. And so there are those that can help to take you forward. And I would lean on my parents as well, you know, glad that I still have them around, my mom especially. And so she would just let me know, like, this is the stock you come from. This is who you are. This is who you said you wanted to be. And these are the things that you can look to make those happen. So I would lean on my community.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anyone else want to take that?
Yeah, I can jump in.
Okay, great. Thanks, Quentin.
Yeah, for me, it's a little bit of a different spiritual approach. For me, I was definitely very fortunate to. Oh, something wrong with my camera. Sorry. For me, I was definitely fortunate to be close to my grandfather, who really encouraged me to be closer to learning about my African ancestry and become more spiritually grounded, and understand that the universe kind of inspires you and is connected to you to be able to achieve the things that you were here put on earth in this moment in time to do. And so for me, I look to my ancestors for a lot of inspiration. Again, learning about that history of where they came from, what they had to overcome helps, but then also digging deeper into history and knowing that all the things that people have achieved, I can do it too and do more, you know. And so recognizing that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams is like my great grandfather and my grandfather they taught themselves how to read and write. And so for me to get my master's degree is really expanding on what they were capable of doing, right? And just knowing that I can keep adding to that legacy. And one of the things that I was told is, you want to grow so your future self can be appreciative of what you've done in the past, you know? And so this idea of like everything I'm doing is paying homage to my future descendants and to my future self, you know? And with that mindset, it's like recognizing that I have to hold myself accountable, right? If I want to be the most successful artist, what am I planting in the seeds today to allow myself to get there, you know? But also, the last thing I'll say is one of the most important things one of my wife emphasized on is rest, you know, and taking care of yourself, you know. And so self-care and taking care of yourself and resting and allowing yourself to rejuvenate is also a very important aspect. So those are the two things that I allow myself to consult and look to to stay inspired.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think I'll move on to our next question at this point. This is a question that really is something that inspired this event, in the sense of, as we start to try to navigate through pulling away from Eurocentric curriculums and making sure that the work that we do in the classroom, in particular in all of our classrooms, but the focus of this being through the arts, is that, you know, as educators, we want to expose all students to so many different types of work from so many different kinds of artists and with different cultural backgrounds. But then there becomes this question about, how far do you take that? You know, it's one thing to, for example, I'll speak about drama. That's where I teach. So it's one thing to say, okay, I've completely revamped the plays that we're going to read, that we're going to study, and you know, we've got a lot of representation from, you know, Asian Canadian or Afro Canadian or Indigenous writers, and so it's one thing to study those and expose our students to those, but I think then it sort of becomes the question of, how far do we take that act of storytelling? And you know, we do so much as artists in storytelling, either through dance, through visual arts, through music, through drama. We are innate storytellers through our art. So the question then becomes, that I'd love to pose to you guys, is whose story are we allowed to tell through our art form? How far can it be taken before we are giving voice to an experience that is not ours? So I'd love to throw that out there. And this is a huge question that I have as I start to do this work, and, you know, getting comfortable being uncomfortable. But I want to move past that now. I really want to know the parameters for my exploration. So I'll throw that out there to you guys, and let me know what you think.
I'll take it first, if I may. Great.
Thank you, Drew.
I get this question a lot: cultural appropriation. What am I allowed to say, to understand, to read, to participate in? And I often, the way I put it is, as a First Nations writer, well, technically I'm half Native and half white, but I don't know anything about my white half, so I'm sort of biracial and unicultural. And my standard joke is I'm half Ojibwe, half Caucasian, so technically that makes me an occasion, or as I like to say, a special occasion. But when you're writing, I always write from the Indigenous perspective, because that's what I grew up in. That's what I know. I grew up in a First Nations community, so I write from that perspective. However, as somebody in Canada, very, very multicultural countries, depending on how you want to define multicultural. I have, in my travels, I lived in Toronto for 20 years, 25 years. I knew many Black people, Jewish people, Asian people. So as a writer, as an Indigenous writer, these people come into my life, and on occasion in my writing, they come into my writing. I have characters like that in a lot of my work. Where I, as a writer, draw the line is, they exist within my work, but I never write from their perspective. I do not have the right to present their perspective, their history, their the stuff that is coming out of their history. Much like a person like me who bumps into somebody on the street or dinner with somebody, I have this relationship with them, and that comes across in my writing. But I would never write their story. And I get the same thing when people say, "Can I put First Nations characters in my stories?" I say, yes, by all means, go ahead. I'm sure they come in and out of your life as much as other people come in and out of my life, but do not write their story. Do not have the presumption to be able to tell their history, their story, where they come from, what's really that important to them, because you only have the understanding of where you come from. I will leave it there.
Okay, if I can just come back with one more follow-up question on what you mentioned there. I think that's such a great lens to look at it through. And so now, as performers, how do we extend that to the performers? So for example, recently in my grade 9 drama class, we were studying Rebecca Thomas's recent collective work of spoken word. So would you say that students who do not have an Indigenous background, should they perform someone else's piece of spoken word?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't know. There was a production of The Rez Sisters by Thompson Highway that was being done at the University of British Columbia 10, 12 years ago. And it was really an interesting production because everybody in the fine arts class were non-native. It was completely all, I think mostly white. And they all refused to audition for it because they said they didn't want to take on the roles of First Nations women. They were afraid of the repercussions, and they said, their terminology, couldn't we do a La Belle Sœur instead? And the profs said why, and they said because, as I said, we don't want to portray First Nations women. We'd be more comfortable doing La Belle Sœur. And the professor came back and said, so you're more comfortable playing working class French Canadian women than Indigenous women? And they said yes, because there are no working class French Canadian women in Vancouver. And I just remember shaking my head, just the visuality that for me that came in with that sort of argument. However, with that being said, I don't know how to answer your question. Performance is often a form of exploring all avenues of life, of the world, of the things that are important to you and the things that influence you. In an educational manner, I have less of a problem with it. In a professional manner, I have more of a problem with it, if that makes any sense.
Yep, it does. Thank you. Does anyone else want to weigh in on this one?
Chantel, do you want to go?
You can go ahead. I'll go after you.
Yeah, for me, I think it's important for us to be able to explore other cultures, but make sure that we are not taken away from other cultures. We're not claiming it as our own, and being transparent and in our intentions and the sources, you know, and also on top of that, doing a check-in, you know, consulting, speaking with people from that culture that you're representing, you know, and getting their feedback, right? And if it's possible, reaching out to the origins of that source. So if you're using someone who's living their work, like, you know, like, see if you can, like, and you know that you're not from their culture or from their background, and you feel like you're not sure if this might be crossing the line, you know, it's important to check in with them, right? But I absolutely agree with what Drew was saying in regards to, in the professional capacity, you tread a very dangerous, I'm using dangerous loosely, but you're treading a very potential problematic aspect and legal implications if you're trying to make profit off of someone else's work that's not from your culture. And so I think it's important, like if we're talking about in the educational setting, like a lot of my students are not Black, and I haven't recited Maya Angelou's work. I haven't recited Sonny Patterson's work, or create artwork that's inspired by Basquiat or Kehinde Wiley, et cetera, you know. And then also I use Sankophonology as the basis of everything I do, right? So most people who I'm teaching is not of Ghanaian descent. I'm not of Ghanaian descent, but it was given to me, the term was given to me to share with others. And I'm always acknowledging the source of where that word comes from, right? From Ghana, from the Akan people, et cetera, et cetera. This is not my word, but it was something given to me to share. And so I think that transparency is really important. And sorry. And if you're doing performance, I think it's important that you are not trying to mimic and not trying to replicate someone, right? So, for example, Maya Angelou, because I love Maya Angelou and I listen to her stuff all the time. Don't try to mimic how Maya Angelou speaks. Like, you know, don't try to mock how she speaks. Like, speak it in your own voice, right? Speak your own truth to it, but don't like try to imitate someone else. So that's my take.
Okay, so in terms of, let's say that you can find a natural connection to the piece through your own lived experience, and so that you're saying that it would still be appropriate for someone who it does not share the same cultural background as the character, for example, or the person who wrote it. And in the case of my example, Rebecca Thomas, so it would be okay if we have a personal connection to what she is saying, but that we're not trying to imitate her voice or to pretend to be something that we're not, but giving life and expression to her words and her story and her experience.
And then the last part is, if possible, where possible, connect with that community. Connect. Okay. If you can't connect with Rebecca Thomas, connect with someone from her community. And get that consultation or feedback.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Chantelle.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what everyone else is saying. I think there's a clear difference between cultural appreciation versus appropriation. I think that is the difference that we're talking about here. I think the appreciation comes when there is the study, there is an understanding of the context of the work. And like we were just saying, really understanding the community and where the work has come from, the lineage, the history. I think that plays a big role. And then on the performer side of it, because I have been in a lot of, situations where I am uncomfortable as a Black artist being in this space, because I know that the director or the choreographer doesn't understand the story and doesn't understand the perspective. So I think that's a big thing too, is, if you're putting on a production, for example, I just saw a casting recently, they're doing a show about the Tulsa Race Massacre, but the entire creative team is white, and that is problematic because that's not their story to tell. It's a very clear example that it's not their story, and, I've seen other dance pieces where the cast is all white and they're talking, it's a Nina Simone song, or they're dancing to Strange Fruit, expressing this very heartbreaking story that I know none of those dancers really understand or, have studied. So there's definitely a line there. And so I think also as a performer, understanding that you have the agency to vocalize these things. I've also been in spaces where I have had to be the one to speak up and say, hey, I don't think I should be in this role, or I don't think, could we bring more people onto the team to cast this in a different way? I think understanding that you do have that agency to vocalize when things, are uncomfortable or problematic is also really important for young artists also to understand. So yeah,
absolutely. I think that we in our teaching as well, it's important to have that sense of openness as teachers to be able to say, as we start to navigate through this work, we're going to make mistakes. That phrase that I have posted on my wall, get comfortable being uncomfortable, this idea of we have to navigate through that. And so if at any point in that work you feel uncomfortable or you need to self-advocate or advocate for others, then it's important for us as educators to create that safe space so that we can explore and that people can feel comfortable to, as you're saying, to stand up and to express how they feel about those situations. Great, thank you. All right, Larnell, are you waiting to weigh in, or do you want me to move on to the next question?
Oh, no, you can move on. Everything has been great. Totally. I guess the short thing I'll say is just understand the reason why you're doing it. Understand the reason why you're choosing to showcase this material, and that will help to inform your intentions. But yeah, definitely agree with everything that everyone's saying.
Okay. Great, thank you so much. I'm furiously trying to navigate between screens, but I'm also writing down what you guys are saying, and this is so informative for my own practice. So I really appreciate your honesty, and I like that also. You're coming to the table, Drew, as you said, and you're like, I don't have all the answers, but I think it's important to consult different groups and communities and make sure that our intentions, of course, are hopefully good in all these cases, and that will help us navigate through this conversation. So I'll just take it to our last panel question now. Since you began in your field, are you seeing more recognition and support of BIPOC artists in your art discipline? If yes, what do you think is contributing to this shift? If no, what barriers still exist that keep BIPOC artists from being recognized and supported? It's all like the awkward, who's going to go?
I'll take this one.
Okay, great. Thanks, Drew.
I think I'm the oldest person on this panel. I'm ancient. I started in the BC time known as before computers. So when I started, I was the only First Nations writer who was writing for television. I wrote an episode of a show that was canceled long before I think the people here were born, called The Beachcombers. And I was the first Native person to work on that. And then I got involved with theater, which exploded in the late 80s, early 90s. And the number of Indigenous artists that were working in Toronto in the performing arts, and to a lesser extent, the writing arts, you could have fit around a kitchen table. There was the dominant culture was not really that interested in hearing and listening and funding Indigenous stories in whatever form. But what I refer to as the contemporary Native literary renaissance happened in the late 80s, and bang, today, as a writer, novelist, playwright, whatever, I frequently get asked my opinion on various books, sort of a small little expert on Indigenous literature, but I cannot keep up the number of Native books that are being published in this day and age. There's a stack there that I will never get through. I cannot get through them all because there's so many people out there telling their stories. Whereas when I started, we're lucky to have one a year, if that. So the explosion has been absolutely phenomenal, wonderful. And as I said, I'm so delighted to be able to not keep up with everything that's coming out of the Indigenous writing community.
That's so positive to hear. I'm really glad to hear that. And can I just say, Beachcombers was an absolute stock favorite. I never missed an episode. Relic, man, he's my favorite.
Yeah, I wrote my episode when I was 12. Yeah.
Wow. No, that's me not getting the joke. All right, who's up next?
I mean, I can quickly weigh in.
Great.
I would definitely say yes, absolutely. Like I'm still stuck on the BC comment. So I'm like, what would I be like after AC, after computers? But anyways, yeah, like for me, I would say the big explosion within the realm of Afrofuturism, of course, as everyone knows, is Black Panther. You know, I no longer had to explain what I've been doing for the last 10 years to people. I just say, hey, are you familiar with Marvel? Did you see Black Panther? You know, you did? Well, this is what I do, you know. This is what I do in real time, you know. And so since then, like the amount of commissions, the amount of conversation starters, the amount of new ways that people want to connect with my work has been explosive, but then also the mentoring that I've been able to give to other artists so they can hone in on how they can start imagining themselves in the future, imagine different BIPOC folks in the future. And so, and there's this huge explosion that's happening in sci-fi communities, you know, with N.K. Jemisin, you know, Nala Hawkinson getting knighted, you know, and if folks don't know those names, then definitely Google them. So a lot of people are interested in thinking about new ways about the future, and one of the things that I've seen happen during this whole thing happening in the world right now is that, like, you know, people are unsure about the future, right? Rightfully so. And so it's important for us to start to imagine positive futures, in my opinion, where you know, we can see harmony happening, where we can see peace happening, where we can see how we can coexist with nature. And like I said in my definition of Afrofuturism, how all living things can heal, right? And so that has been amazing to see artists just achieve such amazing feats right now. And so I'm seeing a lot of commissioning happening for art for Black and Indigenous and people of color artists, just because a lot of us are offering new things and new ways to think about the world, right? And that is a challenge to the model that we currently have and the model that we don't need. So yeah. Oh, and then specifically how that can continue to grow is more collection, more commissioning, more supporting of like buying Drew's books, buying Larnell's albums, you know, going to see and pay Chantelle for workshops, et cetera, et cetera. So just more commissioning of the artists, allow the artists to create, which I've definitely been blessed to have.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Sure.
I definitely agree. I think there's been a positive shift, specifically just because of the conversations that are being had nowadays around equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think a lot of the people making decisions, so whether it be producers or, you know, publishers, whoever it is, you know, they're realizing that they need to do better. So I think there has been such a wave of these commissions happening. And, you know, people are also being held accountable, which I think is really great, to follow through with all of those statements that we saw last summer about hiring more Black or BIPOC artists. And I think even though these positive shifts are happening, there's still so much more work to be done, in my opinion. I was at a town hall the other day, and I loved what the speaker said. He said, you know, there's a difference between saying all are welcome here and this was created with you in mind. I think now a lot of BIPOC artists are being offered a seat at the table, which is great, but, you know, we also need to be valued and heard while sitting at that table. You know, we can't just be sitting there. So I think that's just something to acknowledge as well. We could do more.
And I think that's really important to recognize that. And we're doing a lot of work around that at the Cawthra staff, talking about, you know, making sure that things aren't tokenary, making sure that that more is going into it, the before, the during, the after, so that it's not, you know, same thing with this event. We're hoping that by having every single student here, that we're not just hoping that you reach, you know, people that share the same cultural background or lived experiences as each of you, but we're hoping that everyone is taking something away from this and recognizing that, you know, this spotlight is here because this is part of the work that we need to do, is recognition and appreciation and understanding. And so I certainly hope that we can continue with events like this and continue to celebrate and learn. And it's just been so great, the things that you guys are contributing for us today. So thank you. It's awesome. Larnell.
Yeah, definitely agree with the overall headspace. And I would just say that, yes, in my field, I'm starting to see, you know, even more recognition of BIPOC artists and, you know, an understanding of the roots of music, the roots of certain music, the roots of where everything is coming from. I just think that, you know, similar to what Chantelle is saying, it's kind of the how in terms of how it's getting done, you know, like allowing people to come to the table, but understanding that we need to actually reorganize our thoughts so that we can rebuild our minds and a general stable foundation of where a lot of this stuff is either coming from or how we can learn to appreciate it. And so as we're still in this awkward phase, you know, I would just encourage people to not step back or step away or shy away from, you know, what it means to connect, you know, just get in, learn, you know, it's, I think sometimes it sounds like people might have like an idea of, you know, I'm carrying the sins of my father kind of thing, but we're all here to learn and understand and appreciate, you know, this beautiful tapestry that we've been a part of so long, but now it's, you know, focusing and honing in on these specific points that did not get the shine that they did, or that they need to, you know, to really help organize our thoughts and build a better future. So I really believe in the how it's getting done, and especially being a part of an institution like Humber College, you know, just seeing a lot of the work and the training that we've been going through as a faculty to just like break things down, understand, you know, that idea of equity, that idea of diversity, that idea of inclusion, and also something that's been recently added, belonging, right? So I would say I'm seeing more of an influence, and I would encourage everyone to really just get deep and get messy. It's a lot to break through, but we're all doing
100%. Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Wonderful. This has been so informative. I have 100 more questions I would love to ask you, and certainly I think that a lot of our participants would love to be able to ask you some questions as well. And so the discussion panel initially is just to get the ball rolling, start to have these important conversations. And we've reached the point in our presentation now where we are going to invite our Cawthra students to join us in the breakout rooms. Now, in the course of this presentation, we have actually sent you new breakout room links. There was an issue with the previous ones. So we're going to ask, we've sent the new links to all the teachers. So if you are a teacher present in this live event, please check your email and repost the new links on your platform, be it Brightspace or Google Classroom. Also, all RAP students have been emailed the new links as well because we have you on a distribution list. So what we're going to do now is I just want to explain a little bit about, before anyone goes anywhere for links, guest artists, you can go ahead and click on the links and then you'll be allowed into those rooms and you can get yourselves ready there. For our students that are going to be attending the breakout rooms, I do want to encourage you and remind you about what it means to be a Cawthra student, and especially in this platform, that it's so important for you to remember behavior and etiquette. And so we are going to all leave our cameras off. You're going to remain muted and you're going to pose your questions that you have in the chat. And each of the RAP program teachers will moderate the chat. So if you have a question for one of our guest artists or even just a comment, they'll be able to see the chat and we'll be able to see who's posting. So the RAP teachers that are in those breakout rooms, they're going to be able to moderate and they'll ask the questions to the guest artists. Guest artists don't have to be looking at the chat and answering the questions. Your teacher moderator will unmute and ask you questions, okay? So I will invite you at this time to the students. I will ask, and staff, I'll ask you to join us in the breakout rooms. And I do just want to say a final thank you to our guest artists. It has been an absolute pleasure to meet all of you personally. We've been chatting over email for a couple of months, and I want to thank Miss St. Augustine, Mr. Jones, Mr. Swire, and Miss Lutz for connecting us with these guest artists and for helping to prepare this panel today. So thank you so much. This concludes the live portion of our event. And the last thing I guess I'll say to our regional arts program students, and to anyone really, you don't have to join the breakout room for the discipline that you're in. So if you are a drama student, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the group that you have to choose. We want you to be able to connect with the guest artist that really spoke to you and that you may have some further questions for. Okay, so please check your email for the brand new links for our breakout rooms. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate your participation this morning and we'll hopefully see you again. Take care.